Retired Marine. Jacob "Jake" Harper had seen his share of battles. He'd served 3 tours overseas, watched friends fall, and endured years of pain and trauma. When he left the service, he thought the worst was behind him. All he wanted was a quiet life, a chance to heal. The bar was supposed to be his sanctuary. The Iron Oak stood on a dusty stretch of highway, a modest dive tucked between forgotten motels and abandoned gas stations. Jake had poured every penny of his savings into the place, spending long days sanding down the old wooden bar and hanging photos of his Marine buddies on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was his. For a while, things were good. Locals came for the cheap beer and friendly atmosphere, and Jake found a sense of purpose in cleaning glasses and swapping stories with customers. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was a life he could live with. Until they showed up. The first time Jake saw the gang, he knew trouble had rolled in. They came in loud, a dozen bikes roaring into the parking lot, their leather jackets emblazoned with a skull and chain emblem. The leader, a hulking man with a snake tattoo coiled around his neck, swaggered into the bar like he owned it. He introduced himself as Viper, his grin as sharp as the knife strapped to his belt. "We like your place," Viper said, leaning on the bar. "Good atmosphere, quiet, perfect for business." Jake didn't need to ask what kind of business they meant. "I'm not interested," he said firmly, meeting Viper's cold gaze. Viper's grin didn't falter. "You'll change your mind." The gang drained their beers and left, but the air they left behind felt heavier, darker. The threats started small: a cracked window, a slashed tire, graffiti sprayed across the bar's walls. "Iron Oak is ours!" Jake reported the incidents to the sheriff, but nothing came of it. Small-town law enforcement didn't want to tangle with the gang. "You should just sell," one deputy advised him. "Get out while you can." But Jake wasn't about to give up. This bar was the only thing keeping him grounded, the only thing giving him a sense of normalcy. He wasn't going to let some two-bit criminals take it away. The escalation came one rainy night. Jake had stayed late, scrubbing the floors and wiping down tables. He didn't hear the bikes pull up until it was too late. The door burst open, and Viper stepped inside, flanked by his men. "You had your chance," Viper said, his voice low and menacing. "Now, we're taking what's ours." Jake barely had time to react before they grabbed him, dragging him outside into the alley. They beat him until he couldn't see straight, fists and boots slamming into his ribs, his face. Blood filled his mouth, but he didn't scream. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. When he finally blacked out, the last thing he saw was Viper lighting a match. The fire consumed everything. By the time Jake came to, lying in the dirt behind the bar, the Iron Oak was nothing more than a pile of smoldering ash. The memories, the photos, the life he'd built, all of it was gone. The paramedics found him barely alive, broken and bleeding. The sheriff came by the hospital, offering hollow words about looking into it, but Jake knew better. Justice wasn't coming. Months passed, and Jake's life unraveled. The insurance payout barely covered his medical bills. He couldn't afford to rebuild, couldn't bear to return to the site of the bar. His savings were gone, his pride shattered. He tried to stay with old friends, but the weight of his failure hung over him like a dark cloud. The gang had taken everything from him: his livelihood, his sense of security, his will to fight. One cold night, Jake wandered the streets, his few belongings stuffed into a duffel bag. He passed a bar on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. For a moment, he thought about going in, but he didn't. He stood there for a long time, staring at the glow of the sign, wondering what he had left to give. And when he finally turned away, the thought lingered. Some battles weren't meant to be won. The end.